And then I'll introduce Diana and Oren. Do you want to tell folks about yourselves?
Sure. I've met a lot of folks on the call here. I'm Diana. I work independently as a developmental evaluator and supporting nonprofits and foundations doing strategy and research, and do a lot of scenario thinking, also called scenario planning. And I've been working closely with the Retreat Center collaboration for the last 2 years, supporting the emergent learning and formation of the collaboration. Oren.
Good morning. I'm zooming from Bolinas, which is about an hour north of San Francisco, not too far from Spirit Rock, down the road. I've been part of the Retreat Center Collaborative since the beginning and a member of the core committee. Commonweal is a multi-purpose nonprofit that does work in a lot of different areas, and one of our programs is a retreat center, and the person known here as Jennifer's iPad is the director of our retreat center, Jennifer Stoll.
Great. So shall I just go ahead and get us started?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. I'm curious if raise your hand if you have used and or developed scenarios. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'm just going to scroll over to my other screen here. Great. So there's a little bit. There's some of the steering committee members are on the call, and we're going to build on work that we did with the RCC Steering Committee. That's great. So we'll look forward to folding your experience into this conversation over the next 80 minutes. So just in terms of what we want to do today is really create some space for thinking creatively about the future of your centers and about the future of the sector by using a set of scenarios that we developed last summer in collaboration with the Retreat Center Collaboration Steering Committee. And then in doing so, I want to just introduce you to this tool and way of thinking called scenario thinking. So that's the intent. We're going to jump right into small groups and kind of start to do that in lifting up some questions that you might have about the future. I'll do a quick intro to what scenario thinking is, then we'll build on and share a scenario set that we developed this summer, and then have some space to actually play around inside those scenarios and think about what they mean for you, what they mean for the sectors, what they mean for the communities in which you're working, and then come back together and talk a bit about what came up and the implications that we're seeing, again, for our own organizations as well as for the field as a whole. So that's the plan. Oren, anything that I missed?
No, I think that's good.
Okay, well, I say let's go ahead and jump in, and we're going to go into small groups. And in your small groups, just briefly introduce yourselves to one another, and then have a conversation. Share with your colleagues your thoughts on this question that I put in the chat. So if you could have one question answered about the next 12 months, what would you want to know? And so really push yourself to think beyond, is my center going to be around, right? So what is it about that you're asking questions about? Like, is it, how are people going to gather? What would be really helpful for you to know that about the next 12 months in order to make better decisions today and in order to be able to better plan for the future? So share that with your colleagues. You could have one question answered about the next 12 months. What would you want to know? The crystal ball. So with that, I think Ben or Justine are going to stick us in random small groups for, let's do it. I think 8 minutes should be fine if we're groups of 3.
Okay, good. I've got those groups put together. I'm just going to pull, they're randomized, but I'm just going to pull Diana and Oren out into another room. So let me just do that for a second here.
In the meantime, contemplate the question.
I'm sorry, there's so many names.
You've always wanted.
Okay, here we go.
Fall into that prophetic space.
trickling back in. That's a good sign. People have some more they want to talk about.
Our group ended perfectly on time. We felt really accomplished.
Do you get Amber Alerts? I just got one on my phone. I always feel so sad about those and what's happened to the child.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your crystal balls. Does anyone want to either speak out or put in the chat questions that you're holding and or questions that came up in your group that were especially interesting? You can use the chat as well. Or feel free to speak up. Anything? Okay, yeah, elections, that's a big one. What would it take to have folks? Go ahead.
One thing our group talked about was that some of the questions, I mean, they're less like answerable questions, like what is the answer, and more sort of, we didn't use this word, but like queries, as we say in the Quaker tradition, or sort of things that we're pondering, but oh yeah, there's not one right answer, but there are things to explore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very multifaceted, and that reflects some of the questions coming up in the chat. Will people gather, want to gather? Or we support the hospitality needs? What will people be seeking 12 months from now? What might a pattern of return look like? How do we navigate risk?
When will a vaccine come and how long will it take to have an impact?
Mm-hmm. That's a big one. Schools. There's one here around systemic racism. A small center in a rural area live faithfully in dealing with systemic racism. How we dare to think differently regarding leadership and structure and partnerships, widening circles for BIPOC communities. Wonderful. Great, so you've all started to think scenatically, holding these questions. Oh, here's another one on rural context from Chris. And then talking about the intersection, right, of the uprising for racial justice, the pandemic and the multiple layers of uncertainties around the pandemic, rural specific issues of comfort and safety with coming together and gathering, and issues of like meaning, right? And what are people seeking that retreat centers have to offer? All big, broad questions for which there's no like A, B, C, D, E answer, right? There's a multiplicity of answers. So I'm gonna go ahead and share a few slides here. Let me try to do this with sharing the right thing. Let's see. There we go. I'm going to present that. Then what are you seeing? Is everyone seeing Exploring the Future of Retreat Centers without my messy desktop? Yeah?
Yes.
Yes.
Looking great.
Super. Okay, so I'm just going to do just a quick intro to what we're talking about when we're talking about scenario thinking. And we use the terms interchangeably, scenario thinking, scenario planning. I like the term scenario thinking because it implies both sort of the toolkit and process of a planning tool, as well as a discipline. When I think about scenarios, it's really discipline, a leadership stance as well, a way of sort of seeing and navigating the world. So what are scenarios? Scenarios are simply stories about alternative future environments in which today's decisions might play out. So they're a chance for us to think creatively and tell stories, right, about these multifaceted questions, many of which you just raised. And importantly, it's not about predicting sort of in a single point way what's going to happen. It's about generating a range of hypotheses about what could happen that then can stretch our thinking about new possibilities, new opportunities, new risks. I like to think of scenarios as a means for helping us get our kind of creativity unstuck and begin to sort of see new possibilities by looking into the future, sort of far enough to remain within the sort of zone of plausibility, but far enough out to kind of let go of some of the current constraints. It can be really helpful means of getting unstuck. Just one point of differentiation I want to make is that it's different from contingency planning. So there's a ton of good work going on right now around looking at different financial scenarios, high, medium, low. That's super, super important. We're talking about something a little different, right? This is about looking beyond the financial uncertainty to a range of uncertainties and telling stories that embrace sort of this complexity of a range of different uncertainties. It'll make more sense in a couple minutes. So just, one important sort of principle of scenarios is they're built from the outside in. So rather than focusing on the stuff that we can control, like how we're going to get people to come into our centers, how we're going to prepare ourselves to safely, host folks. That's all super important, but we start by constructing the scenarios by thinking from the outside in, by looking at the trends outside of our organizations, the questions that you all were just asking, and how those then might affect our work. So multiple kind of levels of trends outside your organizations that are worth considering, especially for smaller organizations. So that's stuff in your working environment. So what are people seeking? How are people feeling comfortable coming together? What's going on within your immediate community? What sort of regulatory issues are you dealing with in terms of being able to safely host folks in your spaces? And then as well as broader macro driving forces of, what's going on with the vaccine? What about the elections, right? So these very large social, technological, economic, environmental, and political forces. And so we look at all of that, and we look at both what's relatively certain and what's highly uncertain, and we use that to tell stories of the future. So scenarios are developed using a 5-step process, and we'll share a few resources around all of this if folks want to dig deeper in later. So the first is to just root yourself in the question that you're holding that you most want to answer about the future. And we'll share an example in a minute. And then based on that question, you explore a range of driving forces. So going back, looking from the outside in, what's going on in both your working environment and contextual environment. And then you sort of synthesize all of those certainties and uncertainties to develop a set of stories about the future. And you always want at least 3 stories, no more than 4, maybe 5 stories, just because it's hard for the mind to hold that many stories at once that are really different and push you to think creatively about the future in different ways. And then with that set of stories, then you step back and say, well, what does this tell me? What does this tell me about the question that I'm asking about? What does this tell me about my organization? What does it tell me about the communities that I'm seeking to serve? And then lastly, you can hold on to those stories over time and revisit them and use them as a means for tracking how the future might be unfolding. And what we oftentimes find is with sets of scenarios is that it's not about sort of telling the story of the future that's going to happen, right, and choosing a winning scenario, but in fact, these multiple stories of the future are unfolding right now, at the same time and in different ways. And by rehearsing them, that helps us better get unstuck and act with confidence in the face of uncertainty. So just to give us an example, and then I've got my screen set up in a way that I'm not able to see the chat right now. So if there's questions coming in, just please holler. So just to give us an example of what this looks like in practice, and then a platform for us to have a conversation about. Last June, the Retreat Center Collaboration Steering Committee got together and used scenarios to imagine the future of the sector, and then therefore how might the RCC be able to make the greatest impact going forward. And for that, step one, so going back here to this 5-step process, our focal issue, the issue we decided to focus in on is how might retreat centers committed to doing that inner work, right, in service of outer social impact, reimagine themselves and or shift to remain relevant over the next 24 months. And the over the next 24 months is an important piece. So you want to choose a time frame that, as I was mentioning earlier, close enough in to still feel plausible and relevant, but far enough out to push yourself to see some new possibilities. And so 24 months of the time felt like it was far enough for us to look around the bend to what the world could look like in a sort of post-COVID world. I think right now, you know, for sort of scenario practitioners, we're using much shorter timeframes. Oftentimes scenarios are done in generational timeframes, especially if you're working on issues of social impact, rather than looking at, 6, 12, 18, 24 months. But this, level of uncertainty is totally unprecedented. So that time frame is really about mental models and what it takes to shift mental models. So I'm going to go into then some of the content that we generate. Unless, Oren, do you want any comment on the question? If not, I'll move to the.
I think the only thing to keep reflecting on, I bet a lot of people are pondering, it's, the speed of change, the rapidity in which the circumstances under which we are living right now is happening. It's kind of hard to predict what's going to be happening in 2 months on, let's say, November 8th. Makes this exercise feel on one hand challenging, but it's all the same, it is also how critical it is to start thinking about these different possibilities, which is why the 24-month framework is a balance between what is long enough a time for us to think about, to make plans, but not too far out considering how fast things are changing these days.
So then starting with that question, we asked ourselves, what can we prudently assume as we look out for the context in which retreat centers are working over the next 24 months? And so we wanted to think about so by prudent assumptions, what's relatively certain. And actually that exercise in itself was helpful, because I think when those things feel so uncertain and just so turbulent, just rooting yourself in what feels pretty prudent to assume is a useful starting point. So Oren, what did we?
So these are things that we thought, okay, here's some assumptions that we can make. For one is we think the virus is going to be around for a while, probably. Well, I guess when we did this 4 months ago, we thought 2021. Now there's a feeling that it might be even later. Even the best projections are not putting it for a few months. So we know that's going to be around for a while. We know that there's a strong desire to come together, to share space, to be in nature, and that the moment there is a vaccine, there's an expectation that will be quite pronounced. That this is very triggering and also traumatizing for a lot of people. So we know that that is something that our culture will be dealing with. that travel, it will take it a long time to come back to what it used to be in terms of air travel, which means that most of the travel as it relates, that we can assume that a lot of the travel that relates to retreat centers are going to be more local and regional, that there's not going to be many large gatherings, that people are going to be, like they're shying away from travel, they're going to shy away from large gatherings. And we're seeing this already happening, is that a lot of our patterns of how we work together, how we come together, how we pray together, that is all changing. And there'll be less in person, less in office, less in shared space. So we know that. Do these make sense? Anything here you would want to change or add?
Yeah, Kitty.
I wonder about something about economics, because I think it feels like the trends are that the inequalities of society that we're dealing with are just getting exacerbated by COVID-19. And it's just heading in that direction. Not that it wasn't before, but I feel it's really being exacerbated. So I just think that and economic recession and people who are really getting hurt economically, I think impact us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so prudent to assume that we'll, continue to see that the sort of inequalities, in particular around sort of economic opportunity, being exacerbated in the coming couple of years. Yeah.
One thing that's true of the center where I work is that a lot of the folks that are attracted to contemplative work tend to be older. So that population's just, less willing to take risks with health.
Mm-hmm. So just magnifying some of the prudent assumptions, especially around gathering and traveling.
And, a question I also have is wondering if anyone else on this call is threatened by just the immediacy of climate change, the way we are in California in general, in Northern California. So no matter how secure an organization retreat center might be financially, at least for the immediate term, the threat of, as you know, wildfires, coastal erosion, air quality, keeping a place safe in order for people to want to come, given the immediate threats.
So the convergence of other threats, and something to keep in mind, and you'll be seeing the next slide soon, in which we're looking at things that we can assume and feel confident about, and there's other things we just don't know, which are some of the variables that go into considering the scenarios. So, if you're in California right now, you're feeling the fires.
Yeah, and so if you're running a center in California, particularly in a rural area, forested area, right, it's prudent to assume that you'll be grappling with and will be important to plan around wildfires going forward. And interestingly, when I first started doing work around scenarios nearly 20 years ago, we were talking about, climate change and weird weather events more in terms of wild cards, right? So it was important to research, but to rehearse, but less, it was not so much in the effects of the weather was less of a certainty in the near term.
Yeah. And here we are. Yeah, right.
I think 2 summer camps have burned since the weekend of Scearce in California.
Yes, Oren, that's right. Yeah.
Yes,
Susan. I was just going to say this assumption, it's not quite as well. I hold the assumption that retreat centers are crucial grounding space for transformation in the midst of the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. So holding that, let's look at some of what might be uncertain going forward. There we go. So plenty of uncertainties. This is just what we came up with last June. And Oren, I'll hand it back to you.
So, and remember how we came up with these assumptions and these uncertainties is about going through a group process. So when you go through the scenario planning process, it's a 3-4 day process in which the group together goes through exercises to develop what is it that we can assume, and also what are the uncertain, what's critical for retreat centers, but also what's very uncertain about it. And you may be thinking about in the back of your minds about how would this tool be useful for your retreat center. And in that process, you might develop your own assumptions and own critical uncertainties. So the slide in front of you kind of has it, so I'll go over it quickly. So how severe is the pandemic, and how severe is how fast is it going to grow? Where are going to be the spikes? What are we going to learn more about how it's contagious, the frequency, the intensity? What are the short-term and long-term? We've seen how the curve of the infection in the US fluctuates. So those are things that are critical to retreat centers, but also uncertain. You know, the question of testing, how efficient that's going to be, which is different per states. And then of course, the whole conversation about vaccines. What is the impact that it's going to have on health in different communities with different access to resources? The question about economic effects, Kitty was bringing up that before, that at this point we were uncertain about it. It could be that it may be moving into the area of assumptions, but we don't know what the long-term costs of the shutdown are going to be. And if there's going to be economic recovery, what will it look like? And how is that going to be distributed among different geographies, rural, urban, among communities of color? So that's another area that we're unclear on how that's going to be. What are the social norms for coming together? What is it going to look like? I noticed when I watch films that were made pre-COVID and people are hugging and kissing, it's like, oh.
Yeah.
It's like, so the social norms are already changing. What are the new ones going to be? How long will it take for us to be comfortable in groups? How do those norms differ among, once again, among genders, about cultures, around geographies, how people engage with each other? We don't know what that's going to be. And then the question about kind of what are our spiritual and religious needs? You know, will the institutions that were created pre-COVID still be able to meet those needs, considering all the other uncertainties that we have? What congregations are going to go away? I was in a congregation in New Mexico. They didn't know how to convene online. They haven't seen each other in 6 months. And there's new places I've seen that they have an online presence, which actually has increased their community. After we're taking virtual programming as a temporary transition as we can come together, how is that going to evolve into the future? So these are questions that we're holding that help us think about what these different scenarios would look like. Let's take a few minutes just to kind of reflect on these. Also, are there any other ones that come to mind? Is anything you want to add? Anything here you might want to change? I think if go ahead.
And just worth remembering, we developed these 3 months ago, right? So what feels most critical and most uncertain now, especially given how dynamic the situation is? So just invite folks to speak up as well as use the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, we can't see the whole screen, so we can't see all of you. So if you mute and unmute yourself, you'll bounce yourself to the top and start talking. Margarita?
Well, I just, you know, with the election coming closer and closer, the anxiety is getting higher and higher. I think when we first did this, it was still somewhat like it's coming, but let's not think about it. And now it's like, oh my God, it's here. Yeah. So I think, I don't know where that goes on this one.
Good point.
So the question of the political situation and the political culture. Yep.
Yeah, there's some really interesting work being done around that, and then what is the nature of that uncertainty? And I've seen some good scenario work just looking at what is, to what extent do we see an ability to come together to overcome divisions versus are we moving towards more divisiveness, which I think is a really important uncertainty, regardless of whether or not we're in a Trump or Biden administration.
Yes. Other uncertainties. Well, maybe things are a lot more certain than we thought.
I think
or folks are digesting it all.
I think
is Susan trying to get in?
Are afraid to come back, to the center and what protocols we have in place. I get a lot of phone calls. What are you guys doing to protect us? What can we do to protect you? And there's a lot of uncertainty about whether or not they're comfortable enough coming back. And that's a lot what I struggle with here. So.
I think also too, that's such a good point. And I think also is that COVID in this time, as it goes on, are people going to start treating it like, hey, you gave me COVID, I'm going to sue you kind of thing. And I'm just finding that out in some situations that I'm very close to. And so I'm just kind of thinking about that, how COVID intersects with the culture that's we're well known for. And is COVID, because of the different levels that so many people might be getting this kind of mild COVID, that is it going to be seen as, your like a normal kind of, we'll get over it, let's keep going, let's keep moving kind of thing. So how does that whole thing impact our culture and the stigma that comes with that? I think there's now stigma that's starting to surround that as well. So I don't know, just a lot of thinking lately, I suppose.
Margarita, can I just ask, when you say stigma, do you mean for the people who become ill or the retreat centers that might be carriers of COVID, or both?
Both.
Yeah.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
I went in August to visit my mother in Maine, and in the public radio, they were talking about this one wedding reception that happened at a center. They had 15 extra people that weren't supposed to be there, 65 people, 30 plus of them got COVID and one of them died. And in the news reports, they kept mentioning the name of the center where this thing took place. So that was sobering.
Yeah, very.
I'm thinking about kind of the broad question of what will allow retreat centers to be flexible and adaptable enough to be relevant in this context. Some of us are part of large institutions which tend to be rigid and slow and changing, and some are really small and really vulnerable. So for me, it's a great uncertainty, kind of how to hold steady and grounded in a way that allows us to be truly adaptable.
Right. And there's probably a lot more uncertainties. So what the steering committee did, take all these different uncertainties, these institutional, individual, cultural, we collected these, and together with the prudent assumptions, we turned this into 3 different scenarios. just kind of on a side note, just so you know how my mind works, is like, these are all possibilities. We're not talking about prophetic voices, as Diana said at the beginning. This is not about having a crystal ball, like, here's the future, invest in my company. But these are possibilities. And one of the questions we can ask is like, what are the things that we can do now that will address most of these possibilities? So when we think, like, for me at Commonweal, it's like, what can we do now considering these different scenarios? So these are the scenarios that we came up with. Should we go from the best to the...
Your choice, Oren.
Okay. So one of the scenarios that we came up with is that things are not going well, that there's a big spike in infections, that deaths are continuing, that our healthcare systems are not able to cope, and the vaccine progress is slow. You know, we're promised a vaccine in 6 weeks, but and then on top of that, the aftermath that started with George Floyd's murder continues. So then gradually the economy falls into a deep recession, something that already has come up in the conversation today. And the response to that is people start isolating, people start becoming very tribal, like religious and spiritual organizations focus just on their own communities. I'm going to take care of my parish, of my congregation, of my town. And as a result of that, retreat centers are gradually going out of business. The business model is gone. And most retreat centers start to collapse, and the land is being sold. We have, I don't know, you can imagine like someone who came into some money, a tech person buying these retreat centers to turn them into bunkers or ways to hide away from the culture. Escapists, wealthy survivalists are trying to buy properties in the country, which I know is happening where I'm living. I know it's happening where Kitty's living. This is happening. Rural properties are going up. So as the economy tanks, the virus gets worse, retreat centers gradually start to disappear and being sold. So that's one version of it. Another version is the one that's up there, the 21st century monastery. The pandemic continues, right? We talked about the critical uncertainties. One of them is like, how is this pandemic going to unfold? So the pandemic continues. There's a series of, it says, a series of natural disasters continues in North America. That's hurricanes, fires, as we're seeing right now. The economy is not in total collapse, but it's gradually taking its time to recover. There's spikes, it comes and go. And we're seeing that there's some development of hope coming out of spiritual growth that's coming both from communities that are getting together in small groups, but also having some kind of renewal online. And so we have some retreat centers that they'll adapt to this new reality, that are not finding their virtual space or are not finding ways to cope into this new world, and they're the ones that shut down. But others are starting to reimagine about what they could be. So how do we reach out to people online? What do long-term residencies look like, right? What are other ways that we can think about retreat centers? So a new way of thinking, the monastery being a closed community of people that live together, creating a large pod, so to speak. So another version is the pandemic continues, the economy's kind of flailing, and some retreat centers adapt and others don't. The third scenario is that social distancing works and masks work, and a vaccine is developed and distributed on November 2nd. It's a miracle. The economy then recovers. The stimulus plan that's been in place for the last 6 months actually works. The economy catches up with the stock market, so to speak. People are starting to adjust to a new kind of normal. They adapt. Gatherings not immediately, but take time, are starting to come back in certain areas. We start to adapt to what does it mean to live in a pandemic? What does it mean to face mortality? What are some of the awakenings that come out of it? We start being conscious of all the deep racial inequities that are going on. And there's a deep interest in kind of that soul reflection quality after all of us facing mortality together. There's like, wow, this is what's happening, kind of living through this culture, going through all the racial justice contemplations that we're seeing and events and activities and protests. We actually integrate that into what we're seeing, and there's a whole new global movement that starts, and retreat centers are kind of core right in the middle of it, kind of spaces that hold spirituality and social justice. So these are 3 different scenarios. You can see how the assumptions and the critical uncertainties feed into them. And so the question now, Diana, is?
So just a note on the kind of the process if you were to do something similar in your own organizations, right? So there's no perfect set of 3 scenarios. What we were trying to do here was come up with 3 sufficiently different scenarios so that they structurally were different. They were based on a different set of assumptions about how the future is unfolding. And then based on that, they push us to imagine the future in different ways, so kind of stretch our thinking, and that the set of scenarios was, far enough out to stretch our thinking, close enough in to remain relevant and plausible, and to help us really address that focal issue that we started with, which was, how will retreat centers remain relevant and make a difference in the coming 24 months, and how can the RCC support that? So with that, that's a lot of content, and we'd love to sort of give you the space to play with it a little bit in small groups. And so we're going to split into, Ben, how many folks do we have? About 20 some. For some reason, the number's not coming up.
There are 30 people on the call. I've got about 10 breakout rooms here of 3 if we want that same size.
No. Let's do, why don't we do, you said there's 30. You said how many, Oren?
5 groups of 6.
It's up to you. We'd have to assign folks a scenario. So why don't we do 3 larger groups?
3 groups of 10.
And so Ben, you're going to take, your group is going to work on sold to, Oren, your group is going to work on sold to highest bidder. Ben, your group is going to work on retreat center Renaissance, and Justine, yours on the 21st century monasteries. And so we'll go into those 3 groups. And so you'll be randomly placed in that group, and we're going to invite you to live in the scenario that your group is working in. So you want to sort of suspend disbelief, assume this is the way the world is going, and the future that you and your center are going to have to reckon with. And so we'll spend 15 minutes or so kind of reflecting on how is it that you already see this scenario unfolding today. You're living in this scenario. How might your retreat center have to evolve and adapt? Who are you serving? What is the economic model? Who might you be collaborating with? What does it look like to center equity in this world? And then what capabilities are going to be really critical to survive and to adapt and make the difference that you want to make in the world in this scenario. So suggest folks take maybe a little bit of time to reflect on their own, and then why don't you take 5 minutes, you'll get into your small groups, you'll be assigned the scenario. We'll put right now a link to the scenario set in the chat. So if you're having a hard time getting to it on Google, on Mighty Networks, you can just access it on the link that I just chatted. And then spend 5 minutes reflecting on these 3 questions, which are now in the chat, and then 10 minutes having a conversation as a group about what came up for you. And then we'll come back together and we'll hear a little bit about what came up for folks across the 3 scenarios so you can get to see the whole. That sound okay? Yeah. Okay, so we'll do three groups, and everyone, Ben, Oren, Justine, you know which ones you're taking?
I can reiterate if that's helpful. I've named the groups. So sold to the highest bidder.
Ooh.
Yeah, hey, sold to the highest bidder. I have Diana and Oren in that group. 21st century monasteries, I have Justine, and then I'll be taking Retreat Center Renaissance. Are folks ready? How many minutes would we like in these groups?
Let's do 15, so 5 minutes of reflection and then 10 minutes of discussion, and then we'll be back together by 11:45 Pacific.
Sounds good. Here we go.
I'm watching that happen, and I always get the best group. Oh, Ben's in here. Never mind.
Oh my goodness.
Are you supposed to be in another group?
Science group. Yeah. We are welcome, Ben. You get to do it all. Good job, Ben.
Thank you. Were folks able to find the slides? Because I can share them if that's helpful.
That would be helpful.
Okay, let me do that. So we've gone through all these. Is this a helpful one to look at?
Yep.
Okay, that's kind of the overview. Our group is going to be working on the scenario in the middle there.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I love it. We've got the optimistic one.
Yeah. I was just going to say that.
I do get jazzed up just reading those 2 bottom paragraphs there.
Ben, can you remind us of the questions we need to be looking at?
I am in a sharing mode where I can't see the chat.
Okay, let me see if I can.
If you can pull it up, or someone can read it.
Yeah, let me see if I can do it. I can do it. I got it.
Okay.
What are the signs that aspects of the scenario are beginning to play out? Oh, I want to hear somebody answer that. In this scenario, how might your retreat center evolve and adapt? I.e., who is served? What is the economic model? What are the collaboration possibilities? What it looks like to center equity? And the last question is, what capabilities are critical for retreat centers to survive and adapt in this scenario?
I can answer what are the signs that aspects of this scenario are starting to play out. I get calls daily on whether or not we're open and if we are accepting new groups, because a lot of the retreat centers that are around me, surround me within 70 miles are mostly closed or, you know, not accepting retreatants at this time. So we kind of get their overflow, which is, it could be a good thing, but, you know, I see it as a good thing actually, but I think in that respect, I see our retreat activity steadily going upwards, especially starting in January. A lot of people have called wanting to book for January already, which is good, but we still are limiting our sizing, you know, to only 25 to 30 people. So in that respect, I think we're doing pretty well. And I have a notebook that I keep of everybody. Once this pandemic goes away, we are going to be booked beyond belief. You know, we're not going to have any shortage of groups or anything. And it's just getting through that time and waiting it out. So that is our scenario over on this end, which is a good place to be, I think.
You know, and when answering those questions about what needs to happen to be ready to respond, especially to those last two items that are there in that Renaissance column, it seems to me that you've just articulated a couple of them, Tracy. And if I summarize these incorrectly, speak up, please. But I'm hearing that we need to be listening and kind of reading the signs of the times, and in the background being prepared to respond to those pretty quickly, because I think the ability to be nimble and responsive will be important for responding to this kind of pent-up demand for something more meaningful. One of the things that makes me think that is this, Harper's did a survey of people and asked them, if you could go back to life exactly as it was before COVID hit, would you do it? 90% of the people surveyed said no. Oh. So there's something there. There was something about our lives the way they were before that people did not find helpful and do not want to return to. So what we need to do is be prepared to offer the hopeful alternative.
I want to speak to the, thanks Michelle and thanks Tracy. I want to speak to the last bullet point on this, which is a global movement is catalyzed and retreat centers have an important part to play. I think the timing of this retreat center collaboration has been really well timed and really critical. And I think we've learned some things about how it is we can support one another and not to compete with each other. And that we've also crossed boundaries that are religious boundaries and, you know, maybe some cultural boundaries and geographic boundaries, and how it is that we could network and work together to create a more just and kind and loving world. I think we're learning a little bit about as we gather, and I'm excited about how that might continue in this Renaissance.
Your statement just now and question that you put in the chat earlier about, I think you said something like, how might we kind of reimagine leadership?
Joanne, your sound is really, really low. Get closer to your microphone.
Is this better?
Yeah.
So did you hear what I said so far? No. Okay, so I was just thanking Jean for the comment that she just made and for the statement that you put in the chat earlier, which was something about how might we imagine leadership more creatively going into the future. You know, we all want our own center to survive, right? And in another way, each one of us is better when there are more of us who are able to do this work and lean into the needs of the time. I don't even know what to imagine in terms of leadership, except I'm thinking, you know, are there ways that maybe a couple of retreat centers could collaborate in terms of leadership or purchasing or programming or things, so that we're sort of holding each other up and maybe meeting needs of different populations or whatever. I don't even know what some of those scenarios might be. And I'm just really grateful for Jean, for your asking that really big question.
And I'll just add here, Jennifer Commonweal, can you all hear me? Yeah. Just thinking about, as we look forward to a hypothetical renaissance in the retreat center world, holding a positive view as we move forward, that we not overlook or diminish the importance of the in-between work, moving from this time of trauma and extreme grief in order to provide the services and care and healing and grief work necessary to help people actually be able to see the possibility of a renaissance and heal and move towards it. Yeah, I think that's what I want to say, not to miss the importance of the healing work that will need to bridge the trauma of the past moving into the renaissance in the future, hopefully.
This is Rachel Lyons in Chicago. And I think in our discussion, I'm just realizing, like, what are the actual institutional things our own retreat center can do, or like our collective retreat centers can do in responding to a kind of renaissance, and what does that look like, not just for what the bullet point says about this like surge of soul-centered activism, but what does that look like within our own institutions to have a different like sliding scale for folks because of different identities, or have lost someone from COVID, or people who make more money pay more money to come, and who's the leadership in our own retreat centers. How can we like co-own or share land with folks who desperately need it, or house people in different ways who desperately need it. So I think for me, the retreat center that I work for does social justice immersions with high school and college students. And I think especially for us, just naming like, does my job need to just do more fundraising so that I can support more programs for people who can't afford, but who really need a space for healing and for connection? And maybe it's less about me forming programs, but it's more about me funding so that other people can use the space. So just trying to like reimagine, again, that equity piece and centering that in our taking responsibility for our own institutions and the way that we take up space.
Kind of going off of what Rachel was just saying, Dominican Center has really become much more intentional about our ministry, and kind of not down to bare bones necessarily, but really looking at the ministry at the core. What do we want to do? How do we want to do it? And what other possibilities are there that we didn't have before? And things that we took for granted, like even gathering in the same space as people. And it really, this whole pandemic has really shifted priorities, or at least brought to light the core priorities that we were just taking for granted. And I think moving forward, maybe the 90% of people who answered that survey, like they don't want to go back to the way things were, they were also going through that transformation. But how can we be present to those people who are going through that transformation and be a source of healing for those who are having a difficult time with this? Because I think we're not competitors with each other. I think the competition really is the lack of shared experiences, as we're all going through this so very differently. But how do we bring people together in a common space?
Yeah, this is such an exciting conversation. And I think one of the things that this Renaissance is going to bring is some combination of both retreats online and retreats in physical space. I think we've all learned the importance of that and how many people we've left behind because they no longer could physically get here or maybe couldn't afford to get to a particular place. And I'm looking at the group that we're in, and I think there's either 5 or 6 Catholic retreat centers, you know, who are represented here. And, you know, when I think of Catholic retreat centers, I think of a couple things that would be such gifts for Kirkridge would be like, how do we partner with you around spiritual direction and offer to our people opportunities for spiritual direction, or all the land stewardship that I think Catholic centers have worked, many of them have worked on and could provide spiritual leadership to, would be such a gift to the collaboration. And that, you know, Michelle Gossman's done a lot of that. And then Jennifer out in California, she's been running cancer support circles and healing circles for years, for decades. And, you know, that's just beginning to come into the collaboration. Well, if you just multiply those gifts, you know, that we could bring one thing in, Jennifer's going to bring in this, and we have 150 retreat centers now. So instead of people just going on the Kirkridge website to see what programs we are offering, what would happen if we could start driving them to the retreat center collaboration site as a possibility for them to find all of our programs combined and working together, that we really could create some type of movement. And I believe that what we've done in these last 18 months is build trust. We see each other. We've had coffee with each other. If we haven't had it, we'll hopefully have it in the future. I've come to staff meetings out at the Dominican Center twice and gotten to meet their staff, just showing up, you know, and, you know, sharing a virtual cup of coffee. So I just think there's so much that we could do if we would break ourselves out of the boxes of being, you know, sort of these rural isolated retreat centers working just to survive, is to pulling together and saying, this is what we'll offer and we'd love to have you. I guess I'd like to move beyond where we've been, which is hesitant to promote and say, why don't you all come to this, to let's form the platform in order for that to happen.
Here, here. Thank you, Jean.
Dominican Center representing strong right here.
You start believing in divine powers when you're in a small group and suddenly you're in a large community.
I love how efficiently everyone chooses to come back together. Why don't we hear briefly from each of the groups in terms of what came up, and I invite you to really listen, kind of listen deeply to patterns, for patterns across the 3 groups. So are there things that you would do differently in different scenarios, and or are you beginning to see some things that might make sense regardless of the future that we're living in? So if it's okay, I'm just going to go ahead and, Oren, you want to just offer a few just quick reflections on what came from our group, and then I'll go and ask the others as well.
So we did the worst case, well, I shouldn't call it. We did the scenarios when, what do we call it? I forgot already.
Sold to the highest bidder.
Sold to the highest bidder, right? Vaccine, no vaccine, things get worse. So some of the ideas was, how do we adapt our programming to deal maybe with first responders? What can we do? What new kind of programming can we do in that environment that are not necessarily site-based? There was one example of how this scenario is already happening in a retreat center where the local authorities responded to the fact that a retreat center housed people with different abilities and different skin color, and the local authorities came down on the retreat center, which is kind of a manifestation of the racial divisiveness that's going on. The idea of the village, it's like, so how do we channel the concept of a village where people have roles in coming together, and how does that manifest in a retreat center? And also maybe not only to look at it through what is lost, but what are the values, what are the courage, what is the culture we want to bring forth? What are the aspects of our work today that, well, this scenario is about losing a lot of it, but what is it that we can take and keep forward? Adapting to the new reality. Paul from Lindenwood has offered everybody jobs. If you're interested in doing online retreats, they're adapting very fast. Other concepts were, think about other ways that we can do our work. Is there do we become a shelter? What is our role in Refugio? What is our role in becoming resilience, teaching our local communities, becoming bridges between urban and rural areas? Kind of like, what is it that we can hold on to through this? And then maybe from a village with more courage during these times, kind of the spiritual growth will emerge as well. And then ended with a note on what is it that we might learn from women religious when they set up their communities 100 years ago facing adversity that we can take with us today.
Ben, let's hear from your group. So you were working on the retreat center renaissance. So this is the world in which the economy is moving in a good direction. The pandemic is moving in a good direction. And gathering is becoming more comfortable, and people are kind of learning how to live alongside the pandemic. And there's sort of a new era of soul-centered activism as people really grapple with racial inequities and the space for retreat centers to step into leadership with a global movement. So what did your group talk about?
As we read through it together, we were all like, well, yes, we would like to see the signs that this is playing out. So where are those signs? And we did notice a few of them. One of them is that there's a demand present. People want to attend retreats. And so if several centers in a region are closed and maybe they're just doing real small retreats, the phones are ringing. People want to get in and attend. And people are wanting to book for January or whenever a center is hoping to open. So it's not that the demand is going away. As far as what needs to happen for this scenario to play out, folks mentioned that we need to be listening and watching for those kind of signs and sort of responding creatively to what shows up. Respond nimbly, I think was a word we talked about, and prepare to offer that hopeful alternative that people are looking for. How do we get that reality ready to go so that when people do want to come, we can offer that to them? The evolve and adapt question, we kind of started to go all over after that. So I have 2 more pages of notes, but I'll try to just...
Yeah, just you don't have to do everything, but just a few things that struck you.
How can we work together toward justice? How can we imagine leadership more creatively? We improve each other. So could there be some form of collaborative leadership that the RCC might contribute to? How can we also not miss the grief and healing work that needs to be done for us to bridge trauma and move forward into this really bright future? We can't leave that out. We have to do that work. And then in the critical capabilities, we talked about how are we looking at sliding scale to address issues of income, identity, COVID impact? How do we co-own or share land with those who desperately need it? How do we focus more on funding so that we can have the funding and allow others to use our space instead of demanding pay for services, that sort of transactional view? How can we bring people together in a common space? We're going to need to know how to do that, whether it's virtual or in person. Driving more program participation through the RCC. We can refer each other's guests to different programs if there's a program that another center is offering that we think would be fitting. A lot of different ideas.
Awesome. Let's move to the final group. So that's the 21st century monasteries, and Justine was with that group. And so just as a reminder, this is the world where the pandemic is it's still around. It's not horrible, but it's still there. The economy is erratic, slow to recover. And people are kind of connecting through these hybrid online and in-person communities. And there's some retreat centers that are reimagining themselves as spaces for longer-term residency and spiritual community, while also connecting outside their walls to remotely to communities around the country and around the world. So Justine, what came up there?
I do not have 2 pages of notes. Really,
just a few headlines, given the time as well.
For minutes, we kind of just sat in this grief and also feeling the urgency and holding all of that. And really, a main thread of our conversation was finding partners, new or old, new or former partners. Really thinking about long-term living and residencies. And that especially is true for younger generations, having spaces for them if they're not going to college or schools. Where can we host them? Also looking at longer personal retreats, not just a weekend, but at least 4 or 5 days. A couple other suggestions were really thriving into online programming. Some in the group were already doing that. Some had reservations. And then thinking about the land, many retreat centers who have land, how are we using that to create social distancing, education, and contemplation spaces? And then finally, just kind of a note about this model of rethinking patriarchal and oppressive systems and really thriving and using retreat centers as that bucking of the system, whether it's through new monasteries or sanctuary sites.
So given where the clock is, rather than opening up to a broader conversation, I am going to begin to move us to close, but just wanted to get a sense first, if folks could just raise your hand if you begin to see any patterns across those across the 3 scenarios in terms of things that retreat centers might do. Did you observe any patterns? A couple of folks. Yeah. Yeah, so I heard a few things around partnerships coming up. I heard some possibilities around, so I was thinking about like the duration of retreat. And yeah, actually, please use the chat as well. Ben called out the sort of the centrality of grief and healing traumas as a role that retreat centers can offer online programming. So that hopefully gives you a sense of how, by looking, it's not just about zeroing in on a single scenario, so really invite you to look at the whole scenario set and do some reflection on what might we do in each of these scenarios, and are there some patterns that start to come up, and does that tell us that there could be some things that we could double down on, prioritize now that might make sense in any and/or in most futures. And Dream Gene, yeah, collaboration and sharing unique gifts. Thanks to folks with your posting here. Maintaining hope. Yeah, but with our group, Yolanda really spoke eloquently about the, thinking about the really leading with moral purpose, and that was going to be critical going forward and lifting that up. Just a few resources that I want to share with folks, and then Ben can send these around afterwards as well. There's a lot that's been written on scenario thinking, so just invite you to tap into resources if you want to take this a step further. There's a piece that I wrote actually years ago called "What If? The Art of Scenario Thinking" for nonprofits that is a pretty detailed step-by-step guide. So definitely a place to go to if you want to dig deeper. There's also just been some really good scenario work done in the last 5 or 6 months around using scenarios to just make sense of the current uncertainty. So definitely recommend looking at a piece that came out just last month called "An Event or an Era," which is scenarios on the future of the social sector, really looking at what these kind of intersecting disruptions of the pandemic, of to stepping into greater racial justice, and also kind of the elections, et cetera, what could that mean for nonprofits and for philanthropy? So that just go ahead, Oren.
I just wanted to add is that these scenarios, they're both guiding on a very both spiritual level, but also a very pragmatic level. So RCC is going to be using the learnings from these scenario plannings in order to develop the kind of offerings and collaborations among retreat centers so that we can best serve the sector as much as we can, but also on a personal level. At Commonweal, we take these very seriously as what are the opportunities, both on a programmatic level, a business level, a fundraising level, spiritual level, all these different ways in which we try to think. Strategic planning often tends up being very narrow. Scenario planning opens possibilities in a way that you can account for different possibilities in the future. In a world where we have so many critical uncertainties, it's very helpful. And if anybody's interested in doing this on an organizational level, Diana, who, by the way, is one of the national leaders in the field of scenario planning, we're very lucky to have her with us. We might do something to guide people about how to hold scenario planning with your board and staff. That could be a possibility. We kind of asked for it at the beginning. She might have kind of said yes. But that is something to think about as we're thinking about where we are going. Thank you.
Great. So by way of close, I wanted to share a quote. Oren, anything else by way of closing? No? Okay, so just a little, this is an offering as we're finishing up here. This is from the novelist Arundhati Roy, and it's a piece that she wrote in the Financial Times back in early April. And she says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So I hope that you had some space today imagining other worlds that can energize you to fight for it.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Oren.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you. Muy bien. Excelente. Very good.
Diana, send all that quote, please.
Oh, yeah, I'll send it to Ben, and he can include it with the materials. Thanks.
Beautiful quote. Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you all.
Good work. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.